In this video, we're going to go into more detail regarding Lambda functions by deploying a Lambda function of our own. And this would be a great video for you to follow along with in your own AWS dashboard. So let's start by clicking Services and finding Lambda. If you don't have any Lambda functions already, then you'll start off with a page similar to this. So let's just click Create a Function. And then you'll notice a few things at the top. You have the option to either author a Lambda function from scratch, or choose a blueprint from one of many different blueprints that AWS provides by default. And then finally, you have the AWS Serverless Application Repository. And these tend to be just a little bit more complicated and complex than other blueprints in that they are complete serverless applications developed by both AWS and partners and other developers. For now, though, we're just going to start with a simple Hello World example. We'll start with a function name here. And then for runtimes, you have several options, including multiple versions of Python and Node, as well as Java, Go, and .NET Core. I'm going to leave it on the default Node.js 8 for now, though. For the role, you'll have a couple of options here, including choosing an existing role or creating a new role from one of our templates. You can also create a custom role, and if you have any roles that are service roles specifically for Lambda built, then they'll show up in this dropdown as well. For now, I'm just going to create a new role from templates, give it a name, and then for policy templates, because all this Lambda is going to do is return a little bit of JSON without actually hitting any downstream resources, it doesn't matter which one of these we pick. So I'm just going to pick a random one here. And that's it. We chose a name, a runtime, a role that we're not going to need, and that's all there is to it. And that's it. We've created our first Lambda function. So let's go over a couple of things on this page. First of all, throttling is a way to set a concurrency limit, and what that means is after a certain amount of concurrent invocations of this Lambda function, it'll get throttled and no other invocations will be allowed. So if we wanted to limit the concurrency, we could click throttle here and confirm it, but we're not going to do that now. Qualifiers and actions are tied closely together. So with actions, you have the ability to publish a new version or create an alias of the same Lambda function. And then for qualifiers, you're able to select from multiple versions or aliases. What this allows is version control for your Lambda functions so that you can save and deploy and test multiple versions of the same function. In the actions dropdown, you also have the ability to delete function and export your function, and you can also deploy to Lambda Edge, but that's beyond the scope of this certification, so we're not going to handle that for now. In the next section, you have a visual designer that you can use to add event sources to your Lambda function. For example, if you wanted to add an API Gateway event source, then all you'd have to do is select API Gateway, and you'll notice it says Configuration Required, and it opens up a new window for you to be able to create or import an existing API Gateway. We're not going to do any of that for now, though. We're going to move on to the function code. And right off the bat, you'll notice that we're given a single folder with the same name we gave the Lambda, and one index.js file. Pretty much all it does is export hello from Lambda. And what this means is if we hit the test button, then we expect to get hello from Lambda back. So let's give it a shot. We're going to hit test, and the very first time we hit test, it's going to ask us to configure a test event, which just means an event with test parameters that we can pass to Lambda in order to test it. I'm going to give it example test, and we're not using any parameters now, so I'll just leave this alone. Let's create that and hit test. And there you go. If we open the details, we'll see that we got the status code 200 and the body, hello from Lambda, just like we expect to see. One more thing to note here is that you can open the logs in a new tab, and that'll go to CloudWatch, which is a log stream service that captures logs from a whole lot of different AWS services. So right now, because we've only had one invocation of Lambda, we're only going to have one log right now. And it doesn't show very much, but you can track more complex logging using Lambda and CloudWatch this way. For now, though, let's keep exploring our Lambda function. So if we were to go back, we'll notice that it allows us to edit code inline, which we can do right now, or if we open the code entry dropdown, we also have the option to upload a zip file or upload a file from S3. Now we will get into this a little bit more in a future video, so we're going to skip this for now. We have the runtime here again, and then important here is the handler. So the handler is where Lambda looks in your code for the function to invoke. So right now it says index.handler, which means we're looking in the file index.js and the function handler. Another thing you'll notice is that when Lambda invokes this function, it's passing an event parameter to it. Now this event parameter is going to have anything we pass into the Lambda function as input. And let's give this a shot for example. So if I wanted to use input instead of a default message, then I would just grab the input. So I'm going to say that there's going to be a message piece in the event parameter passed to the Lambda function. So in order for that to be true, we're going to have to change our test event. And we're going to have to give it a message parameter. Well, that doesn't make much sense. Let's call it name. So name is Matt. And hello from event.name. Let's save that. And let's try another test run and see if it works. And there it is. It's that easy to pull event parameters into your Lambda function. Hello from Matt. So let's continue scrolling down to see what else we can configure with this Lambda. Next is environment variables. So you do have the ability to set environment variables with Lambda functions as well. And let's give that a shot right now. Let's actually set an environment variable of message. And we'll say that the value is high. And then let's try to use that in our Lambda function. So instead of hello from Matt, I want it to say hi from Matt. So let's use that right now. So to pull an environmental variable in Node, it's going to look like this. And let's give that a shot. So we'll save and test it out again. There it is, hi from Matt. So it's that easy to use environmental variables with your function. Next is tabs or tags. So if you need to give it, say, a billing group or billing resource, you can do that here, or just any other metadata you want to attach. And then two more things I want to focus on at the bottom of the page here are the basic settings section and the network section. So for basic settings, you have the ability to change the amount of memory that your Lambda function can use when it's invoked. The minimum is 128 megabytes, all the way up to a maximum of 3008 megabytes. Now I encourage you to check out the Lambda pricing page to see how changing this affects the price of your Lambda. For timeouts, this is the amount of time that Lambda will try to run its code before timing out. It has a minimum of 3 seconds and a maximum of 5 minutes. And finally, you can choose to deploy your Lambda function into a specific VPC. So let's say we had a database inside our default VPC and we wanted Lambda to be able to manage it. Well, Lambda would need to be in the same VPC in order to do that. So you could deploy your Lambda into the default VPC, after which you'd have to choose your subnets and security groups, but it is an option there. Oh, one more quick note. Concurrency pertains to throttling up here. So if we do throttle it, then it'll set the reserve currency to a specific number. And then after that number of concurrent invocations, Lambda will no longer invoke for you. And that about wraps it up for this introduction to Lambda functions. So if all of that makes sense, then feel free to move on.